One of the most powerful things I think we have available to us as human beings is hope. The reason it's so incredible and so fascinating to take into consideration the idea of hope is because of what hope can offer us in the here and now, but also in the future. And the fact that hope is legitimately a tangible, measurable experience that happens in the brain. So what is hope from a neuroscience perspective? First and foremost, it's important to understand that hope is a complex emotion, which, if you remember, primarily lives in your right brain, but is also supported through the detail of why that hope exists in your left brain. And both of those things together help to calm that fight, flight, or freeze system and move you into a space of calm and peace and rest through that parasympathetic rest and digest system. It's all integrated. Hope is a thought, and thought is a neurochemical response in your brain. Science has shown us that you cannot have a thought without having a legitimate change in your neurochemistry, either neurotransmitter changes or hormone changes that impact your physiology. So you can take it to the bank. If you have a subconscious or a conscious thought, you have legitimately changed your neurochemistry and the function of your body, because you cannot have the thought without it. You have to have a substrate or a substance in order to produce a product. Hope is a product. It's a thought based on transmitters and hormones and brain function. So why does that matter? It matters because if we take the same idea around neuropharmacology or the same idea around movement, and we say, what does it look like for me to change the movement of my thoughts and the process of my thoughts, and know that every thought I have is going to physically produce a product that is going to move through my body. We know that's true because we've seen the powerful impact that drugs can have on someone's system when they're working through mental, emotional, or physical challenges. Hope is a thought. Thoughts are produced by neurochemistry. Neurochemistry is produced by brain function. Hope is a realistic, tangible, measurable, and powerful resource that can and will legitimately impact your physical person, and hopefully your mental and emotional health as well. You know, simply put, it's an input and an output. But from a scientific perspective, what we refer to that as is a sensory-motor integration. So when we talk about sensory systems, there are so many things that we're discovering nowadays about the way the brain works and the way our system is made that we are still discovering new frontiers. What has been commonly agreed upon is that we have 5 basic senses of taste, touch, sight, sound, and smell. But the 6th sense that is the most powerful and actually the oldest system in the body that we've discussed before is your vestibular system, which helps with movement and recognizing movement. On top of those 6, though, they've discovered 13 to 15 additional unique receptors in the body whose sole purpose is to process information from a unique space. For instance, what does it look like for your body to take in all of the information that makes up gravity? What is your body's response to being able to process a pharmaceutical through what's called a chemoreceptor or chemical interaction? What does it look like for your body to be able to regulate heat internally through thermoreceptors? One of the most fascinating things is for us to take into consideration, how many instruments do I have? What does my orchestra look like? Do I just have a 4 or 5 piece band? Did I just find out that I have a 6 member? Or did somebody tell me, you know what, I think the more and more we're learning, we don't know what we're limited to. We don't know what we're limited by. We may have 20 or 40, or 100 years from now, we may realize we don't even know how many we have. We just stopped at 100. You know, there's a great story that I think of when we think about neurology and contemporary clinical neuroscience, and that's the patent office in the US in the early 1900s. At one point in the early 1900s, the person who ran the patent office shut it down for a couple of weeks because he said everything that can be made has been made. Well, that turned out not to be true because you're watching me on a video camera. So clearly there was still some things to be made. So for me, from a clinical perspective, I think it's really profound for us to say, maybe it's better for us not to say what we can't do, but start asking questions about what we haven't discovered and what that leads to. and the potential possibilities in those spaces, especially as it applies to improving our health in a practical way as day-to-day people, and maybe in the lives of the other people that we come into contact with when we start to perceive the world with more possibility rather than more restrictions. The reason this so profoundly changes the conversation and our perspective dramatically is because we've discussed in previous conversations what happens when we feel cornered or when we feel like we hit a wall. Your brain will not pursue a future that feels the same as your present or your past if it feels dangerous. If you get a diagnosis or you have a conversation where somebody tells you what your limitations are, or you have an identity in a community that's wrapped up in what you can't do, your brain is going to naturally and efficiently reinforce whatever keeps you alive and helps you to survive. Well, what if dreaming and pursuing a second opinion or choosing to go after a skill set that you haven't currently developed yet feels challenging or feels like a threat because you've been sold this idea that you're incapable? The idea of capacity, both spiritually and neurologically, both scientifically and theologically, creates a space where if we put ourselves into a self-induced or externally influenced box of limitations, our chances of being able to produce unimaginable change are far less likely. Am I saying that you can pursue something that's impossible, improbable, unhealthy, and inappropriate? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you are in a space where your only mindset and your only perspective is that you are in a fixed state, not only is that spiritually and neurologically incorrect, based on the evidence that we already have, but unfortunately it's going to intrinsically leave you in a place with less possibility and by default less opportunity. I'm simply recommending that you leave yourself a space to increase your awareness of what is and realistically isn't possible unique to you, so that you can make a healthier and more appropriate decision about what to do next. I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and say, I'm out of options and I don't know what to do next. I also know what it feels like to wake up in a space where somebody said, you know what, I know that's where you're at and I know that's where you've been. Maybe we can be curious about investigating where you could end up and where you could go. Yes, you might have limitations, and you may even have limitations of physical matter. You may have limitations of how you personally encounter the world through mental health and emotional health that's different than your family and your friends and your partners. The question is it possible to step back and at least not say it's finished and you're at the end of what's possible? Because I don't think realistically you're designed to close your own patent office. I don't think realistically you're designed to say something isn't possible. I think realistically it's fair to say, let's investigate, let's research, and let's see what we discover. The point of this conversation is just to plant a seed and to open up the dialogue to say, first and foremost, do you know that you are capable of change? Not from the esoteric or the ideal or the abstract perspective, but from the literal, physical, mental, and emotional space that is your brain function. We're going to continue to give you the resources and the practical applications that point you towards navigating, understanding a little bit more about how you're made and how you function and how you can operate in that really ideal timing and sequence. But for now, the most important thing is to appreciate that you are so incredibly made and so powerfully capable of real change in real time. Does that mean that everything that you're encountering will change today or tomorrow? It may not. But does it mean that you can start to plant the seed for change and you'll see that show up in real and tangible ways in the future? I certainly hope so. For me, the idea of functional neurology and the idea of being told I wasn't in a fixed place with my diagnosis, with my fear, with my faith, and with my concept because of my context was so eye-opening and so revelational to be given the opportunity to understand that I wasn't restricted by the lack of information and the lack of understanding that I currently had when I found out that functional neurology even existed.